evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Excellent. So, on behalf of Zero Hour Shropshire, a very, very warm welcome to this evening's Parliamentary candidate Climate Hustings here at Eastern Oswestry, and indeed to those who are joining us on the live stream. So, a few housekeeping matters first, if you'll forgive me. We'd be very grateful if you would observe the COVID protocols for the building, please. Keep social distancing where you are able. Wearing your face mask when you're moving about the building, please, and keeping your mask on if you're comfortable to do so whilst seated. And then following the one-way system on exiting the building, the stewards will guide you on that at the end of the evening. There is no fire alarm, I am told, so if it does go off, it is a proper fire, and the stewards will guide you to the nearest exits, one at the back of the building. The toilet facilities you will have walked past on your way in, so the ladies and gents are out in the corridor. There's also a facility for the non-able bodied out there. Mobile phones, would be very grateful, please, if you could switch those off or turn them to silent now, please. Thank you very much. And in terms of the running order, we're expecting the event to close at around about 9:30. So my name is Jules Payne. I'm the moderator for this evening's event. I'm the director of a local boutique marketing communications company, ex-chair of Oswestry Chamber of Commerce. And obviously big fan of Oswestry and North Shropshire. My role tonight is to ensure that we keep to the timings, that all our candidates are given equal opportunity to address the previously moderated questions that have been submitted to Zero Hour Shropshire, keep the response time, and that we are all respectful of the rules of engagement and each other, which I'm quite sure that you all will be. So let me briefly introduce the context to this climate hustings before I'm asking the candidates to introduce themselves. In a recent Ipsos Mori poll in November, conducted between the 5th and the 11th of November, 1,009 British adults aged over 18 ranked pollution, the environment and climate change their primary concern. 40% of those voting electorate. Significantly ahead of the pandemic, the NHS and the economy. The Climate Emergency and Ecology Bill, a private member's bill, with cross-party sponsorship, is the only legislation before UK Parliament that will effectively tackle the current climate and nature emergency in line with current scientific evidence. So before I introduce our guests, I'd like to remind you that other parliamentary candidates are available, but this is a selective hustings in line with Electoral Commission rules that permit. So in alphabetical surname order, I'm going to invite the candidates, please, to offer their brief opening statement, each of whom have 3 minutes. So I would remind the candidates that we have a timekeeper here at front. Therefore, I'm going to ask Duncan Kerr of the Green Party to offer his opening statement. Duncan.
Thanks, Jules. Oh, better use this. Hello, if you can hear me, no doubt. Delighted to see so many people here. I think Jules has already covered it. We do now need to act. The whole motto of the Green Party is to think about the global issues, but for goodness sake, get on and do something about that. And the time for pondering what to do, the time for waiting for others to do it, the time to say we won't do anything before somebody else does, has gone. We haven't got that time. So we do need to act. But in this election, uniquely, you have a party which has that to its core of acting both locally and nationally, and also wins elections. So remember back in May, we had a local election in Oswestry, well, 50% of those people who voted for the Shropshire Council and for Oswestry Town Council voted Green. It's that larger support we've managed to achieve over the years by working hard on the ground. So you have 2 Green councillors on Shropshire Council for Oswestry, and you have 12 of the 18 town councillors for Oswestry are also Green town councillors, the rest are Conservative councillors. So it is by working hard, doing the hard work, working to make a better Oswestry through the Future Oswestry Group, get shop fronts improved, you've probably seen that. We've got other ideas. We've got solar panels that have already gone up on the market hall. We've got ideas of better cycleways and cycle rickshaw. We've got ideas of our freer bus. On Saturdays, the bus around the town is now free, courtesy of the town council. Not the county council, which should have been doing it, but the town council has actually stepped in to make it free as a means of public transport. And voting Green is the best and most powerful way of sending a message to the government that you want to see change. For all my life, people have talked to me about tactical voting and said, don't vote for what you believe in this election, lend your vote to somebody else. That'll sort it. And for most of my life, I actually followed that advice, and it got me absolutely nowhere. We had coalition governments and other governments who didn't really believe in, but they thought they were less worse than the opponents. So forget all that. Don't vote for the least worst option. Vote for what you actually believe. Vote for the person and the party that's got the best track record of delivering. Don't be fooled by somebody who comes in and says, I can promise you the sun, never seen before, never done anything on the ground. Look behind the mask, look over the page on what's actually been done by that person, by that group of people in your communities in the last few years, not just at election time. I don't know, that's 3 minutes, felt like 3 minutes to me. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Duncan. Helen.
Good evening. My name is Helen Morgan and I'm a Liberal Democrat candidate in this by-election. I live locally in Harman Hill with my husband and son. This by-election is a golden opportunity to send a message to the Conservatives. And having canvassed thousands of local residents, it's clear that the people of North Shropshire are fed up of being taken for granted. The Conservatives have failed to live up to their promises, and not least when it comes to their commitments on the climate emergency and the environment. The climate emergency affects our lives here and now, whether you're a North Shropshire farmer battling extremes of drought and heavy rain, a homeowner in Melville facing repeated flooding, or a resident of Preece trying to cope without electricity for 72 hours in the wake of a bad winter storm. If I'm elected as the MP for North Shropshire on the 16th of December, I'll be looking to hold this government to account on its broken pledges. The UK's decision to cut international aid and the bizarre recent budget slashing duty on internal flights showed the world that the Conservatives don't take the climate emergency seriously. The outcome of COP26 was a national embarrassment, leaving the plans of the international community dangerously watered down. So what difference can electing one MP make? Well, we can take local action with a global impact. I'll be for fighting for investment in sustainable public transport in North Shropshire, not only because we need to cut our car use and cut our emissions, but really we need to connect the thousands of people isolated because they don't have access to a car. I'll campaign not only to reopen the closed train stations, but more importantly, for improved bus services for the majority here who can't easily access a train station. I would encourage Shropshire Council to use their powers to franchise bus services for rural areas and ensure that these new bus services are electric. It's also clear that the Conservatives don't understand farming, nor do they understand that farmers are our key allies in the fight against the climate and nature crises. They're the guardians of our countryside and our wildlife, all the while producing food to put on our plate. I'll be fighting to ensure that they're still in business to lead that fight when the Environmental Land Management Scheme comes into place by keeping up their existing payments until it's implemented. Liberal Democrats are proud of their environmental record. In government, we more than tripled renewable energy and created the world's first green investment bank, which was subsequently sold off by the Conservatives. Our policies are ambitious, to produce 80% of our energy from renewable sources by 2030 and create legally binding targets with the policies in place to meet them on clean air and clean water and improved biodiversity. through the restoration of our natural habitats. But this is a by-election, and it would be misleading of me to promise to deliver the Lib Dem manifesto. This is our chance to send a message to the Conservatives that their empty slogans and broken promises on climate change are just taking us for granted. I'm the only candidate who lives and works locally here who can win this by-election and send that message to Boris Johnson loud and clear.
Thanks, Helen. Neil, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Slightly unusually, I'm going to start off by paying tribute to another candidate who is sitting alongside us today. Someone who's done a great deal for raising the issue of climate change in North Shropshire, and that of course is Duncan. And it's important to acknowledge that it has been the Green Party over recent years who have made inroads on both the town and the county council here in Oswestry. And it's clear that the issue of climate change is something that resonates very strongly here. It's an issue which affects us all, and as a father of a young son, it's an issue that I am personally invested in, so we have to get it right. And whilst there have been positive steps forward, there is still much more work to be done. And I want to see a world in which we clean up the air we breathe, we restore our natural habitats, and we increase our biodiversity. And that's why I believe that when we look back, we will see that the historic agreement that was reached in Glasgow was the beginning of the end of climate change. The beginning, but certainly not the end. And along with this Conservative government, if elected, I want to work tirelessly to achieve that goal. We mustn't forget that the Glasgow Pact, of course, was the first ever global agreement in which every country signed up to phase down coal power and to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. It provides a commitment to help developing nations tackle climate change, and of course it keeps the 1.5 degree goal alive. And since the UK took over the presidency of COP in 2019, we've seen the percentage of the global economy committing to net zero increase from 30% to 90%, and I think that's a record to be proud of. And all of this is reflective of the Conservative government's record in protecting the planet and building back greener. We've used the freedoms, having left the European Union, to be able to pass the landmark Environment Act, which tackles plastic pollution and cements our position as a world leader on the environment. We have the 25-year Environment Plan, which will deliver cleaner air and water alongside 500,000 hectares of wildlife habitat. And we've been working with our farming communities so that they can continue farming productively but sustainably in the future. You add on top of that the £80 million for the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, which will deliver over 90 projects on 600 sites and commits to trebling tree planting during the course of this Parliament. And then there's the Clean Air Strategy, which will deliver our clean air, and the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, which will not only create jobs, 250,000 of them, but also an investment of £12 billion, which is likely to be tripled within the next, by 2030. But vitally, unlike the other parties, the Conservative Party's policies are costed and they're achievable. These are serious issues that require serious politics, and the steps taken on this issue by the Conservative Party the steps taken are all part of this government's commitment to achieving net zero by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Ben.
Thank you, guys. I'm Ben, and I am Labour's local candidate in the North Shropshire by-election. Look, there's a tendency when we talk about the climate crisis, the emergency, that we get stuck into talking about how serious we are, how passionate we are, and we get stuck into figures. I think that the idea that something must be done has got us into a very difficult position today. We're at cliff edge. And it's a disaster. So I'm going to cut straight to the point, and instead of giving figures, telling you how important this is, which we already know, I'm going to talk about the action I want to take. And the most important message that I want to get across today is that the path to net zero is through opportunity, it's through optimism for a bright future, and it's not about sacrifice, and it's not about doom and gloom. So I'm not here to be downbeat, I'm here to offer a positive alternative, and that means offering solutions to the climate crisis which get us on that path to net zero, but also brings about opportunities in the immediate term. So it means about jobs, good quality, high-skilled jobs. It means transitioning to a new energy mix of sustainable energy, which brings jobs, which brings skills along the way in the places that we need it most. Oswestry, Whitchurch, Ware, Ellesmere, Market Trade, and everywhere in between. It also means new homes, which are better insulated, which save on energy, but also bring down family bills. And it also means about investing in those opportunities of the future. Public transport, better active travel, so that people feel the benefits immediately, as well as in the long run. Look, tonight everyone's going to say the phrase that we always hear, something must be done. And I'm hoping tonight that instead we actually get on to talk about what must be done. And for me, that's local action. That means better planning rules, so that everyone gets a say over local development, so we can hold people to account and say, we want greener homes. We want homes which are more sensitive to the natural environments. And it also means investing in local businesses, the greenest local businesses on our high street. It means buying, selling, making more locally, supporting local farmers, but also supporting the greenest shops on the high street which sell local produce and goods which are made locally. And it also, most importantly, means about those opportunities for the future. Investing in public transport, investing in skills, investing in future technology which will bring those green jobs of the future to towns like this which, let's be honest, really need them. So look, it's also about connecting the global and the local, because we can't do this alone. It means investing in climate diplomacy. It means having an approach to trade where we have clauses in free trade agreements which push the big emitters to take action themselves. That also means sustainable development. UN goals, using that as a framework. So look, the main message I want to get to you tonight is optimism. It's optimism for the future, it's optimism that we're going to get to net zero. And it's an optimism that comes through opportunities, which reshapes our economy on the way to bring those better, unionised even jobs. And that's the message I want to get across. Sense of optimism for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. To keep the event flowing this evening, I will be reading out the questions that were pre-submitted, and also to minimise handling of mics, etc. So forgive us for that. But if you are in the room and your question that was submitted is your name is read out, do please, if you feel comfortable doing so, raise your hand so that the candidates, if they wish, can direct their answers to you. So, on to the questions, candidates. Some very good ones, I can tell you. Ian Lander. Ian is in the room. Thank you very much, Ian, for your question, which is, in view of the UK's minimal contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, 1%, should we have a moratorium on the headlong plunge into wind and solar photovoltaic, open up the North Sea new gas fields, and fund a national research body manned by STEM-trained staff to look into truly reliable energy sources, for example, nuclear fusion? I'm going to start with Neil on this one, please.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I think this is all part of having an integrated approach to tackling the climate crisis. That's why the Conservative government have set forward a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. And that's not just about developing new techniques, but it's also about job creation within the green sector. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we talk about 250,000 jobs that will be supported by this, and a substantial investment by government of some £12 billion that is likely to be met with a £6 billion investment by the private sector over a 3-year period. And I think by taking that approach, we can look at more investment in wind farms, we can look at offshore wind, we can end the sale of petrol and diesel cars, and we can protect our natural resources. Of course, all of these things have to be done in a sustainable way, and we have to be doing that in a measured way. I think if we rush too headlong into things, and I'm certainly, and I'll take Duncan's phrase from earlier on, you can't promise the world. What we have to do is have measured plans that are achievable and obtainable. And that's the difference on this stage this evening. It's the Conservative Party that have put forward an achievable and pragmatic solution, understanding the challenges that are there, but have done so on a costed basis. That's not something that the other parties have done. And it's that costed basis that is so critical here, because if we're going to achieve this, we need to make sure we've got the resources and the funding in place to do so.
Thank you. Helen?
Hi, thanks for the question. I mean, I think we need to be showing global leadership on climate change, and I think saying that we're not the major part of the problem and continuing to invest in oil and gas in the North Sea is the wrong answer. And I think one of the issues that we had with COP26 is that because the Conservatives have been unable to show leadership, we've been unable to get a sensible outcome from that summit. So I don't think we should be stopping investing in renewable energy, and I think it's becoming more and more reliable all the time, and we're also developing technologies around storage of energy that allow us to use that sort of weather-related energy more effectively. And with regards to things like nuclear fusion, I think it's well worth continuing to invest in them. But you know, nuclear fusion has been the fuel of the future certainly since I was born. And we have invested billions into nuclear fusion projects in Oxford and in the south of France. And you know, let's keep going. But I don't think we should pin all our hopes on an unrealistic or unachievable fuel of the future when we have actual, reliable green technologies on the ground that we can invest in now and create jobs now and show leadership across the world for climate change.
Thank you. Ben?
Thank you, Ian. Look, the future of energy in the UK and across the world is a mix. It's a mix of sustainable energy. And at the risk of making an enemy early on, it doesn't revolve around oil and gas. It revolves around sustainable energy, a mix of not just solar, not just wind, investing in new technology, tidal lagoons like the Welsh Government's plan in Swansea. But it does also include nuclear, because today 16% of the country is powered on nuclear energy, and that cannot be removed overnight, because otherwise it will have to be replaced by something which is not as good for the environment, let's say. Look, my plan as a local MP is to support the development of local energy, development of sustainable energy on a local level. Now, some of you might know that there are plans in the pipeline for a solar farm near Oswestry. I think this was first mooted a couple of years ago. The council announced a feasibility study. The people who want to develop this want to get on and do it. They want to, have apprenticeships. They want to have good quality, high skilled jobs for people in Oswestry. Let's get mothballed into all of these feasibility studies, just like everyone else does. So for me, it's about cracking on. It's about moving to that sustainable energy mix as soon as we can and reaping the benefits, not just to avoid the climate crisis, but for the jobs which come with it as well. So I don't see oil and gas as a major part of the energy mix in future. We do need to be moving away from it, and it's sustainable, and it's local, and it's bringing good quality, well-paid, high-skilled jobs on the way.
Thank you, Ben. Duncan?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. I'm going to be brutally honest really with you here. We in the West, well, people born into the West will emit as much carbon dioxide in 2 weeks as an African person will for the whole year. So whether we like it or whether we don't like it, we are disproportionately, each of us, responsible for rising carbon emissions. And not just now, but historically over decades. And so we are the people who are the primary culprits of this as it goes on and affects countries, most of which are innocent but will be more dramatically affected than we are. And I think just on compassionate grounds alone, we need to start taking resolute action to tackle that problem. Let alone the fact if we don't tackle it, and if we don't tackle it now, the prospects for our children and our children's children will become untenable. At the moment, COP was a step forward, a small step forward perhaps, but I do agree a step forward, but it's left us with a world of around 2.7 degrees warming. That's not sustainable. If you think we've got problems with immigration, mass movements of people, you wait till you see a world that's 2.7 degrees and warming. Because we're talking about very significant parts of the planet becoming uninhabitable. We're talking about ecosystems that can't adjust that quickly over that period of time. And that will have a dramatic impact. So we do need to take action. The good news is the action that we need to take is already being mapped out. We don't need to have to cling on to some new zany technology or some magical things. We've worked this all out years ago, actually, but the government has backtracked. I remember that each home was going to be zero carbon by law, by the building regulations, by 2015. But two parties here pushed that back, and now we're still building homes with gas boilers, which we need to take out in 10 years. That's how far we are away from doing the right thing. We're taking massive steps in the wrong direction. Some people here, like my colleague on the right here, wants to build a North West Relief Road for Shrewsbury and dual the road to Oswestry and carry on road building.
Thank you, Duncan.
So, we haven't got time to do that. We do have to take action. It is important. We have the moral obligation.
Thanks, Duncan. This question is from Jude Goff. Jude, I know you're in the room. Jude asks, we clearly need to continue multiplying the use of clean, sustainable electricity. Storm Arwen has and still is causing devastation. Bearing in mind that Arwen is probably just the first of similar storms this winter, and may well not be the worst, how can we ensure a steady and safe supply of clean electricity in the future? What can we do to ensure that when the electricity, one source of power for most people in this country, such storms will not cause chaos in the country, especially in remote areas? And I'm going to give that question first to Ben, please.
That's a great question, Jude. Thank you very much. Look, it's about investing locally, it's investing nationally, and it's energy security. We should be investing in new technology in the UK, and also investing in the technology we've already got to build wind farms, to build solar farms, to build tidal lagoons, and all kinds of technology which hasn't been developed at the moment. But energy security is absolutely vital to this. We should be investing in great big oil gas pipelines to bring fossil fuels from Russia. It simply doesn't make sense. So what we need to do is we need to invest in Britain, we need to invest in North Shropshire, and that's exactly what I stand for here tonight. Because as I've been saying all along, the answer to the climate crisis is bringing new good opportunities, fresh and exciting opportunities on the way. Because there's incredible potential here to improve all of our lives in the immediate term, the medium term, in the long term. So, Storm Arwen, it's a bit of a wake-up call really, isn't it? And, it shows that we do need to invest in energy security and local energy and really make the most of this, this transition.
Thank you, Ben. Neil.
Thank you, Jude. Very good question, and it's an issue that affects all of us. In fact, I was speaking to someone in the space sector a few days ago, and he was making a very interesting point of using solar energy from space and what it can do. You've got transmitters and batteries on the ground, which can be covered by trees, so you've got the development of planting more trees, but also the absorption of energy that can deliver large reserves of renewable energy. And that's just an example of the innovative approach that we're seeing from, and this was a company in the UK, the innovative approach we're seeing from companies in the UK to deliver more sustainable energy. But of course, it is absolutely vital we're looking at alternatives. As Ben says, we need to be looking at the security issue of achieving that. And of course, we've seen the detrimental effect where we're not doing so. And we've had Storm Arwen, we've got a further storm brewing tomorrow. It's Barnabas or something, I can't quite remember the name of it, but it begins with a B, so it's on its way, and this is a serious issue affecting all of us. So we do need to look at alternatives. That's why I want to see more offshore wind farms, getting sustainable energy through that route. But I really think there is a route forward here by capturing the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit of the UK, such as space technologies, which I think have a real place to play, not necessarily in the next 5 or 10 years, but going forwards. And what we will see is that through the investment of the government in our 10-point plan, we will see that investment in jobs, in businesses, to ensure that we're finding alternative, innovative solutions to this very important issue.
Thank you, Neil. Duncan?
Yeah, I think it was Quasi-Quartain who said last week that we must prepare for more extreme events. You obviously knew about the storm last week and the one tomorrow. I was at a Shropshire Council meeting last week where we had a report on flooding and said that by 2050 you'd expect 27% increase in severity. That will overtop the Shrewsbury flood defences. They're about 5.5 metres. This would be regular 6-metre floods. And that will have catastrophic impacts right the way down the River Severn. So we are facing a changing climate, and it's happening now. What can we do about it in terms of electricity? I think we need a better mix of generation. We've tended to go with very large offshore wind turbines because people didn't think people wanted to have smaller wind turbines closer to them. But the danger of that is if they're catastrophically hit, the whole power goes off because you haven't got a diverse means of generating electricity. We failed, for instance, to get a hydroelectric scheme on the Severn at Shrewsbury. Engineering-wise, it was absolutely fine, but the government's programme was so difficult to comply with, the timescale was so ridiculous that they couldn't get the application in. They should have got that application in. But above all, everything, we can do a lot more to insulate our homes. There's millions of homes that haven't even got loft insulation, for goodness sake. I'm 60 now. My first job was to look and put loft insulation in homes back in 1978. And I could do that job now. There's no grants for it anymore, but because there are millions of homes, leaky, poorly insulated, people suffering from hypothermia. The best things we can do is to start a massive programme, generate huge amounts of jobs, put in wall insulation in, floor insulation and roof insulation. Then you find it much more feasible to heat it with renewables. And that's just such a no-brainer. I just can't understand why we've had to wait, 40 years in my case, for that to be implemented.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. I think the question was about resilience of electricity supply in the event of a serious storm. And we saw last week with Storm Armin how serious it can be in what probably wasn't the biggest storm we've ever seen. So there were certainly villages in Priest and Hadnall where they were without power for well over 72 hours. So that's why last week I co-signed a letter to Quasi-Quartain to look at building resilience for rural communities in instances where power goes down, because it is going to become more and more frequent, as we know, as the climate crisis worsens. So there are lots of things we can do, but we need to be encouraging power companies to have better backup plans to deal with serious storms, and whether that's laying more cable underground rather than having it running over the tops of hills. And we need to have realistic options in rural villages, because sometimes the power is going to go off in a bad storm, and we need to have realistic plans to make sure that the people in those villages are safe when that happens. So someone I know who's 87 was without power for 72 hours, and that's really serious. We all know what that means. If you're old, you can't see where you're going, you probably can't use your phone, you can't cook, you're cold. These are very serious issues, and they're going to become more and more of a problem. So we need to look at the plans we've got in communities to make the power supply that we have more resilient. And I think that's a separate question to how can we generate more renewables. So it's about looking after communities, empowering them when their lights go off. In Priest, the lady who runs the post office set up in the community centre food and warm drinks and food for people who'd lost their power, and that's fantastic. But we shouldn't just be reliant on community efforts, we should have plans in place for those people.
Thanks, Helen. The next question is from Gary Churchill. I don't know if you're in the room, Gary. Thank you for your question. Carbon emissions from homes account for 20% of the UK's CO2. But new houses being built in North Shropshire are still being fitted with gas boilers, and the government's Green Homes scheme was abandoned earlier in 2021, having improved only 47,500 homes nationally against the target of 600,000. If you were elected, how would you tackle the huge problem of ineffective insulation and inefficient polluting heating systems affecting so many homes in North Shropshire and the UK? And I'm going to ask you, Helen, to take that first, please.
Thank you. And I think you probably stole my first line, which is about the government failing to effectively insulate British homes. And if we look at CO2 emissions from homes, actually insulating our existing housing stock is the single most important thing we can do. It will provide jobs and it will reduce our energy use. So it is the single most important thing we can do, and it's vital that we bring that back and administer it competently. I think the issue with the scheme that the government had was that it was just basically incompetently administered. So that's the first thing. We need competent government to get those homes insulated. I think the second thing is around new build housing. When we were in coalition, houses had to be built to a zero carbon standard, and the government subsequently dropped that target, and we desperately need to bring that back for new build housing, and we should be going for an initial zero carbon target and then improving those building standards to become passive houses. But most of this is about home insulation. There's no point fitting air source heat pumps to a drafty, badly insulated home, so we need to get the insulation right first before we go into the newer technologies that can deliver the reductions that we need.
Ben, please.
Thank you very much, Gary. Look, this is all about new technology. This is about investing in communal heating, as we're now starting to see in the big cities. We need to now bring this to the towns and the villages. What this means is that if you have new housing estates, which are close together, we're talking about terraces, semi-detached, that kind of thing, you can invest in communal heating systems. Of course, it means also investing in heat pumps. It also means investing in technology, which is in its infancy at the moment. It's like bringing those good new jobs on the way, the high-skilled ones, the well-paid, the apprenticeships, all that kind of thing. But it also means greener homes more generally. And the big way that we can get greener homes more generally is to get people to have a say. I really strongly believe that we need stronger planning laws so that people have more of a say over the homes which are being built in their area. So that people can look at the plans, they can look at the plans of how they're going to be insulated, how they're going to be fitted, how they are sensitive to the local environment, and people can have a say on whether they want these homes in the area and whether or not they're happy with the way they're being built. And look, more jobs in line now with house building. It's also, what we've got to remember here is that electricity is not itself clean. It's not all right to just move to heat pumps and electric boilers. We need to make sure that energy itself is clean. So we can't have new coal mines in Cumbria. We can't carry on bringing in oil from Russia. We've got to invest in sustainable energy in the UK. Solar farms near Oswestry, wind farms, and as I've said a few times, tidal lagoons. So look, this is again about enjoying the transition and having greener jobs as we make greener homes.
Thank you, Ben. Neil, please.
Thank you very much, Gary. And an excellent question. And that's why this government has launched the Heating and Building Strategy. That has committed £3.9 billion to decarbonise our homes and buildings to assure that's how we're going to deliver net zero by 2050. And what we've seen is a commitment by the government that we'll be phasing out new gas boilers by 2035. That's supported by a grant of £5,000 for low carbon emission heating systems. That is part of an initiative to support people moving to a lower carbon emission lifestyle. And it's all part of an overall strategy by this government. And what we've seen, and I think it's important to look at the record of this government, since 2010, the UK's greenhouse gas emissions have dropped by just under a quarter. It's dropped from 600 million tonnes of carbon dioxide to about 450 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. And what we've also seen, in combination with that drop in the use of greenhouse emissions, we've seen an increase in renewable resources by up to 40% of our generation. And it's that combination of approaches that is going to make a difference. Of course, as Duncan, as Ben have alluded to, we need to make sure we've got insulations in homes so we're being more energy efficient. But fundamentally it comes down to putting the infrastructure in place when we're building new homes and in our older homes to ensure that we're able to live a more sustainable lifestyle.
Thank you, Neil. And Duncan, please.
It's a good question. Something I've pondered early in my life. I used to manage programmes of council houses, thousands of council houses, and trying to improve the energy efficiency of those. So it's something I know a little bit about from my experiences there. Unfortunately, over the last 10 years, we've seen a preponderance of market-led solutions. So do you remember a few years ago, the government had the bright idea of getting energy companies to help us with insulation, and they flooded the whole country with free light bulbs, very cheap light bulbs. I think something worked out, every home had the equivalent of 12 light bulbs. They, of course, were not used for to deliver the results, and it was a waste of money. We've had other schemes, the Green Home scheme, as you've mentioned, doesn't deliver. It is very difficult to deliver mass insulation of properties through an individual incentivisation. I remember we had the same problem sometimes when we needed to do what's called area renewal. We had areas of terraced Victorian housing in the country, particularly in the north, which was very, very run down. We didn't want to clear it for slums because that's usually destructive, but we worked out a solution of going down the whole street and doing everybody's house with an approved contractor. Because would you know where to go to get somebody to insulate the walls of your home? Who would you trust? Who do you turn to? This isn't cheap work, it's quite destructive work when you're at home as well. So the council and the government needs to get behind residents and say, we will take all the stress out of this and we will go from street by street, there's not the contribution to it, but we will organise the works in that way. Until you get insulation in, and this is the bad news, things like air source heat pumps aren't going to heat a leaky home. You will find that most of your energy will be going out to electricity because it's about the 3-to-1 conversion rate. So for each unit of warmth you put in, you've got to put 1/3 of that in as electricity to generate the system. That works well in a well-insulated home. It will not work well in a poorly insulated home, and most of us, by any European standards, live in very poorly insulated homes. We're in a poorly insulated room this evening, and we're feeling the effects of that, aren't we? But that's what these people are like in people's homes. So that's the key issue here, is insulation.
Thank you, Duncan. This next question comes from Nancy Stewart, and I think, Nancy, you're in the room, well done. Nancy asks, I live in Market Drayton and I am a volunteer with Zero Carbon Shropshire. Given the urgent actions that must be undertaken in the face of the climate crisis, I have been shocked and disheartened to read campaign literature from the Conservative, Lib Dem and Labour candidates and not seen a single word about climate issues. It is the single most important issue to me, but I wonder whether the candidates think the people of North Shropshire aren't aware or interested. How do they see the role of members of Parliament in providing leadership in response to climate change? And I'm going to ask you, Duncan, to take that question first, please.
I think I was the only one not guilty on that charge. Clearly, I think climate change is the definitive issue of our age, not just this election. But the time frame to do something about it is getting rapidly shorter and shorter. But what I think we need to offer you is concrete proposals and actions. I think the time to talking about it and saying this is dreadful or we've got this new technology has long gone. What you want to hear now is what we're actually doing to get more buses so people can use less cars, to get better insulation for homes, as we've talked about, and to get better means of communities coming together so we're not overlined. And therefore we have to start thinking about the role that fossil fuel companies are playing in this. We saw COP, what wasn't mentioned was the huge dominance of fossil fuel companies in that process. And they haven't got an agenda, I'm afraid, which is good for climate change. We have to face up to that and their dominance of our economy in this country as well. And we have to work with local groups to find sustainable and effective ways. In North Shropshire, there's huge opportunities in that. We've got great food production in North Shropshire. We could celebrate that, and we could actually help our farmers to become more stewards. They're good stewards anyway, most of them, but to develop more biodiversity on their farms. And this week there was a new agricultural and land use compact signed by many of the leading landowners in the country, which aims to do just that. So we've got many things we can build on. But we've got to start talking and we've got to start doing. A few years ago, with your predecessor, I used to argue, he used to say there wasn't such a thing as climate change. It's just a figment of your imagination. We don't have to talk about it. You sat where you are, and he's saying that regularly, and that guy was the Secretary of State for the Environment, probably. We've sort of moved on from that, and now everybody says, well, apparently they don't say something about it. I thought everybody said something about it, but it's not saying it's going to change chemistry of the atmosphere. It's only actions that are going to do that. It's actions that we need now.
Thank you, Duncan. Ben?
Thank you, Nancy. First off, I completely dispute the idea that my leaflets don't talk about green issues. They talk about investing in public transport, building the train station towards the street, supporting local buses, building train stations elsewhere, you know, Ellesmere, Batchchurch. They also talk about supporting local businesses, buying, selling, making more in our local towns and villages. Look, my leaflets aren't full of green jargon, because that helps no one. My leaflets are about action, because that's exactly what we need on the climate crisis. I talked earlier about this idea of something must be done. I'm not interested in that. You won't get leaflets through the door saying that something must be done. You'll get leaflets from me saying this is what we're going to do to bring green new opportunities in the area through public transport, through supporting our high streets, through supporting our local economy, because that's what I believe in. The politics of opportunity, not the politics of sacrifice. And there's a real good point in this question as well about the leadership that MPs can provide. Look, my job as an MP for North Shropshire would not just be about voting on legislation, it would be about championing our area. It would be about bringing green new jobs, green new businesses to North Shropshire. Because, you know, that would be my priority, North Shropshire. I've got a local plan, you'll have seen it all on the leaflets about public transport, about supporting local businesses. And so, you know, green issues are absolutely a priority here. And they're mentioned in every single leaflet that I've put through doors.
Thank you, Ben. Helen?
Hi, thank you. Well, I hope something that has come across in some of the literature that I've put out is that we need to support our local farming industry. So, our farmers have the highest animal welfare and environmental standards in the world, and at the moment the Conservatives are undermining them by signing trade deals such as with New Zealand and Australia, which don't have climate commitments in them and which allow substandard produce to be brought into this country, and they'll undermine our family farmers, and we can't fight the climate crisis and the ecological crisis without the help of those farmers. So it's really important that we work with them and that we back British farming. And the way that I would do that is by working to ensure that currently their payment system which is in place is being phased out, and the new system which is coming in 2028 to help them lead that fight against climate change isn't ready to come in yet. And so there's a risk that our family farmers will go out of business or have to use less environmentally sound practices to keep going in that intervening period. So hopefully what's coming across in my literature is that I'll work with them and make sure they don't go out of business and they can help us in that fight against climate change, and at the same time show leadership in our international trade deals to ensure that we're not just offshoring our own environmental responsibility. And that's why Tim Farron this week has introduced a private members bill to ask MPs to consider the impact of foreign trade deals on our own farming industry, to make sure that we're not undercutting our local farmers with this substandard produce from abroad, and that we're using our global opportunities responsibly so that we don't offshore our climate commitments and our climate responsibility.
Thank you, Helen. And Neil?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. I think what's really important is that climate change is such an all-consuming issue. It touches every aspect of our lives. And so that's why I put forward a number of pledges on my campaign literature about supporting our local businesses. Well, that means ensuring that we're getting investment from the 10-point plan and the investment in businesses and jobs, that £12 billion will invest. It's about protecting and supporting our farmers. So Helen has touched on ensuring that farming is supported. Well, of course, that's precisely what we've done by leaving the European Union. We've been able to move on from the common agricultural policy well, people may scoff, but what it achieves is allowing us as a nation to develop our own rules, which will allow not only for us to maintain and improve our standards, which are already fantastic, but develop more sustainable farming practices. Our farmers are the backbone of this community. They have done a tremendous job particularly over COVID, producing the food that has sustained this country. And it's really important to acknowledge how much they contribute to the battle on climate change and the biodiversity piece. But it's, as Ben said, it's about transport, having that infrastructure in place. That's why I had the rail minister down last week looking at reopening the Glasgow to Oswestry line. That's why it's making sure that we've got positive alternatives to taking our car. It's why the Conservative Party have said all new builds and homes and businesses should have electric charge points, so that we are making it easier and more sustainable for people to access green technologies. That's how we're going to deliver it. That's why in my manifesto pledges I'm talking about businesses, because it's about green businesses, it's about green transport, it's about protecting our rural communities, because that's what's so beautiful about North Shropshire, that it is it's an outstanding area.
Thank you, Neil. This next question comes from Andrew Dyke, and I think Andrew is joining us on the live stream, so thank you, Andrew, for your question. He asks, what are the candidates' views on the state of our rivers and beaches? Do they favour renationalising the water authorities? And I would like to invite Neil, please, to take that question first.
I don't think it would surprise anybody if I said I'm not in favour of renationalising. But what I would say is that progress has been made in improving our waterways and our beaches, but there is more work to be done. We go to some outstanding beaches in this country, but we also go to some that need a lot more work doing to them. But what we must do is ensure that we are all working towards that goal. That's why we've seen, and the government listened, when they announced with the Environment Bill that there would be further strengthening through the amendment to see a reduction and put it to enshrine it in legislation for water companies to reduce and have progressive reduction in the adverse impacts of discharges into our waterways. That's the positive steps that this government is taking. But of course there's more to be done, and I want to be pushing that further. If I'm elected on the 16th of December, I'll be wanting to work with agencies to make sure that the government is delivering on those promises.
Thank you, Neil. Duncan, please.
Yeah, I'll let you into... Can you hear me? Yes, I'll let you into a little secret. Sometimes I get a paddle out and I go for a little canoe. And one of the places I used to like to go to is the Wye, but the Wye, as you probably know, has been inundated with runoff from poultry farms, and it's become quite toxified with algae as well. So that's a beautiful river. It's one of our pristine rivers. It's a real sad indictment that we've turned it into that state. And why on earth are we still allowing raw sewage to go into our rivers? I mean, good God, in 2021, we still have systems where if it rains heavily, the sewage just discharged straight into the river. It's about time we can deal with that. Is there the money? Well, if you look at the profits that the water companies are taking out, most of which are foreign owned these days, and the people are extracting profit, there clearly is the money. So yes, I do think we should renationalise. I think it's perfectly sensible to say there are key resources which everybody needs, air being one, water being another, and it's perfectly appropriate to have that under the control of the state. It was a mistake, it seems, to privatise that out. It doesn't even work. You can't choose your water company. It's not like gas, you just choose, you're condemned by where you live to the monopoly of one water company anyway. So it seems to me that it was a stupid road to have gone down, and we should renationalise it. Beyond that, beaches, most of the waste I see on beaches is plastics, and I'd say, why on earth are we still allowing single-use plastics? There's so much proliferation. I mean, yes, well, I do litter picks, I'm sure lots of us do litter picks. How long do we have to keep doing litter picks before we move to a society that says, why are we allowing this stuff to be sold, given away in the first place? So I want to see the ban on single-use plastics. It's Green Party policy. If people want to have single-use items, there's natural alternatives. You can make forks and knives out of wood, you can use paper bags, all of which are compostable and don't cause the problems on our beaches that we're actually seeing at the moment. So yeah, I think it's a very good question. We really do need to address our water courses. It's the quality of our life.
Thank you, Duncan. Helen, please.
Well, I looked at some numbers on this, and Severn Trent discharged sewage into the rivers of North Shropshire for 795 hours in total during 2020. So I think we're probably all fairly clear that that's not a great record and that our rivers are in a poor state. I think what we need to say about this is that the Conservatives had an opportunity earlier this year to vote to prevent water companies discharging sewage into our rivers, and they passed it up. They towed the line, and they voted as the government with them. And this is an opportunity at this by-election to vote for an MP who won't toe that line and who will stand up for us and vote not to put sewage into our rivers. You know, if we look at our local environment, it's particularly insulting to our farmers who've been stopped from spreading manure on the fields at this time of year to protect water quality, and then allow a water company to put human waste directly into those rivers. So, you know, we need to do something about it. Liberal Democrats are in favour of taxing water companies when they discharge sewage into the rivers so that they're responsible for providing the funds to clean the rivers up. So we're proposing a sewage tax to tackle this problem. But there's a reality that they've made billions and billions of pounds of profit over the period of time since they were privatised that could have been put into improving the sewage infrastructure so that we don't have this terrible problem of runoff in bad storms that is only going to get worse as the rainfall becomes more intense.
Thank you, Helen. Ben, please.
Andrew, if you're part of the pump, first off, I just want to put a bit of clear water between me and Neil on this one. He said that progress has been made. Unfortunately, I'm afraid it hasn't. He mentions sewage in particular and the Environment Bill and the amendment which he's proud of. This amendment, what it said was that there had to be less sewage each year in the rivers. It didn't say by how much, so it could be about 10 millimetres, and that's the bottom line here. We need actual action on this, and it's not just about the River Severn. It's also about our meres in Ellesmere, Colmere and the rest. Because let's be honest, these are beautiful places. These should be tourist attractions, they should bring new jobs into the area. But they're not being properly promoted at the moment, and partly, let's be honest, it's because they're not being properly looked after. So, we need more lit picks around the area, we need more money to, fix these town centres which are associated with them. And look, what I'm saying to you is if the meres are cleaner, if the meres are, safer places to be, then it's going to bring jobs in the long run. And, that's exactly what we need. It's not just meres, it's local rivers, like the River Perry and, elsewhere nearby, River Dee. I mean, these places are beautiful places and we need to do more for them. We need to make them cleaner, we need to make them safer, and we need to make them tourist hotspots because, I think that Ellesmere is better than Windermere any day of the week.
Thank you, Ben. This next question on transport comes in from Henry Thomas. I don't know if Henry's in the room. Thank you very much for your question, Henry. Henry asks the panel, the government has recently announced a 50% cut in domestic flight duty and a large road building programme, and has not raised petrol duty for 12 years, whilst bus and train fares increased by 40% or more. What transport policies do the candidates think are needed to tackle the climate emergency? And I will invite Helen to take this question first, please.
Well, as I mentioned in my opening speech, one of the problems that we have in North Shropshire is around public transport, in that there isn't really very much public transport. I spoke to a lady in Trefona last week who basically can't leave the village unless someone gives her a lift. And I know in Oswestry we have an issue not only with kind of regular bus services, but also with taxis and people not being able to get around when they need to. So I'm not particularly in favour of large road building programmes because I think we could achieve the congestion and emissions cuts that we need to achieve through better public transport. Having said that, I think there are instances where certain communities would benefit, and we need to, if we are going to build a road, we need to do that in conjunction with local communities if they want them. But on the whole, I think we need to focus on public transport, and especially in this county where so many people are isolated because they can't get around in their own car. And it's not just about train stations, it's about buses. Because, for example, if you're in Whitchurch and you want to take your kids swimming and the pool's been closed, you've got to get a bus all the way into Shrewsbury and out again to go to Market Drayton, which is where the council have recommended you take your kids. It's about a 4.5 hour round trip. So we need to join up our communities with clean electric buses, and we need to empower our local council to commission the routes that we need to connect those local people. And I think then we would see less need for road building.
Thanks, Hannah. Neil, please.
Thank you very much. I think this really requires an integrated approach, and clearly that involves more investment in our public transport systems. There is an absolute lack, and it's entirely inadequate, a lack of connectivity between our market towns and our villages. We need to be putting more investment in bus services so that they're serving the community. It's absolutely ridiculous. If you want to go to Ellesmere from Whitchurch, you have to go to Shrewsbury. It's 3 hours round trip. I mean, it's just balmy. But we need to be doing that in conjunction with measured road building. I do think there is a place for road building. For instance, the A5, I think, is an entirely inadequate route. It is congested. I think it needs to be dualled. That's an important key strategic route between Oswestry and Shrewsbury. But it needs to be done so that we're supporting the greater use of public transport, using green initiatives, having electric buses, diversifying our railways as well, reopening those lines. So there are more options, and we're pushing people away, we're encouraging people away from using their own vehicles, and they're moving on to public transport. That's why the Conservative government have put forward initiatives for new builds to have electric charging stations. I think we need to do more of that, particularly in our rural areas. It's all part of the levelling up agenda to make sure we're getting investment here so that we can make those sustainable changes that are needed here, but are also affordable for people living here.
Thank you, Neil. Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. I mean, we clearly need to bear down on flights, particularly domestic flights. What a catastrophic thing to do. At the time you've got the COP in your own country to actually be reducing the airport duty on domestic flights, where there's a clear alternative of the train for those journeys. I just cannot understand the thinking of that, why that makes any sense. Only makes sense to people who say we need to protect our airports, we need to keep the business model going, rather than actually adapting to the change in the climate. So yes, I mean, we want a frequent flyer levy. We need to do all we can to get people to use alternatives to flights. Flights are extraordinarily damaging, not just because of the amount of carbon dioxide, but because of the height at which is emitted as well. We need a massive investment in buses. Shropshire has just put in a scheme for 96 million. It only tells you how bad the situation is that Shropshire needs 96 million. Will he get it? Well, he didn't get any of the levelling up funding, so if he gets 96 pence, that'll be a surprise. But that's the scale of the challenge we're facing. And we haven't got a bus on the Sunday, no bus in the evening. The bus service is so degraded that it's stopped being a service entirely. As I said, the town councils have to step in and put a free bus on service on the round town for Oswestry because Shropshire Council has just gone AWOL. Active transport. Shropshire Council refuses to implement 20's plenty. You might think, well, what's that going to do? When you reduce speeds of vehicles, you make walking and cycling a lot safer, and a lot more people will take it out. But we've had flat refusal. Just here at Cheshire, East Cheshire Council has adopted 20's plenty across all its towns. Shropshire Council went on one town. Oswestry Town Council's had policy predating its green control to have 20's plenty. Flatly refused by Shropshire Council. Road building, oh for goodness sake, why are we still building roads? The North West Relief Road will, in its construction, use 70,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide emitted. That's equivalent, I've worked out, to driving 12,000 cars a year, or having 26,000 homes emissions for a year.
Thank
and
you,
that's
Duncan.
just the building of it. So we need to address our transport.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you. Ben.
Thank you, Henry. There's quite a lot I want to get through in this answer, so I'm going to be quite quick. First off, flights. Yes, we absolutely need less people flying, but look, the people to blame here aren't the people who go once a year to York or once a year to Crete. The people who need to cut down on travel are people who go to New York for an afternoon's meeting. So what we need to do is we need to encourage alternatives, Microsoft Teams and Zoom meetings and the kind. But it's also about, for those domestic flights, making sure that the alternative is better. Let's be honest, most people who travel from London to Edinburgh would much rather get a 4-hour train than fly. But the fact of the matter is it's cheaper at the moment and it's absolutely absurd. So you have to offer people a better alternative on public transport. On roads, look, you know, for all the best will in the world, in North Shropshire, people are always going to need, some people at least, personal vehicles. Trevlick's never going to get a train station, and Rosie Gatford's never going to be on the town service. So it's accepting that, and, you know, I'm going to be completely blunt with you, I do believe in road improvements. Dueling the A5, I know that Duncan and Neil, whilst I might disagree with them, have been clear on this, and it'd be good to know Helen if she does support or oppose dueling the A5. But above all, it's public transport. It's making sure that this is always the better alternative. I mean, I used to get the bus every morning when I was living in Oswestry to Shrewsbury to do A-levels at the Shrewsbury Sixth Form. I mean, it took about an hour. A drive was probably 25 minutes. So obviously, a lot of people by the end of the year would have learned to drive, got their own car, and it's making sure that public transport is a better alternative. Because I'm pretty sure a day save is probably about, what, £8 now? Obviously, people are going to drive. But the last one is active travel. I mean, I don't know if you guys, if anyone here knows Middleton Road, which connects the Calvin Lane Co-op into the town centre. I mean, they've got a cycle lane the entire way, but any time of the day you can go there and there'll be cars parked all along there. So it's one thing having cycle lanes, it's another thing actually enforcing it. But you know, the big message here is ambition. It's being ambitious about public transport, it's being ambitious about having better alternatives to flying, and it's being ambitious about the active travel infrastructure so that we have more opportunities for towns like ours.
Thank you, Ben. Our next question comes from Alison Leyland, and I think Alison is joining us on the live stream. So thank you for your question, Alison, which is, what will you, your party, do to promote a circular economy, focusing on repair, reuse and recycling, rather than exhausting the world's resources by the overconsumption of new goods? And I'd like Duncan, please, to take that question first.
Well, a very good question. For those not aware of what a circular economy is, it's the idea that we circulate materials around rather than digging them out of the ground, using them and throwing them away afterwards. One of the things I've tried to do since I was elected to Shropshire Council is just suggest that they had a waste minimisation strategy. We may not know it, but in Shropshire we produce the 5th highest quantity of household waste in the country, with over a tonne for each household is produced. Now, I didn't say what should be in this waste minimisation strategy. Well, that was a bit too dangerous. They probably wouldn't like me making any suggestions. I just said it would be a good idea to have a strategy. Funny enough, they had one 10 years ago, and they just actually no support from these two parties, but the Tories just talked it out and said, we're not having a strategy. We are not concerned about the amount of waste we produce, even though we have to pay for it to be burned or put into the ground, so there'll be money savings as well as environmental savings. So that's one big thing. But beyond that, I think we need to put in a carbon tax so that when materials are brought into the country, they've got a high carbon load and they're going to be not recycled here, they have to pay a duty on it. So we start to impose obligations on producers to build in the concept of reuse. The Repair Cafe that was running pre-COVID, I know it's just about set up again, hasn't it, post-COVID, is an excellent place where people can learn the skills. But I'm afraid of industry, they like built-in obsolescence. We all know that about the light bulb, don't we? They like the idea that you have to chuck it out and go and get another one. So we do need legislation to compel manufacturers to build in reusable parts and parts that can be maintained. And if you try to maintain a car these days, you realise how difficult that is.
Thank you, Duncan. Helen, please.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the most important elements of a circular economy is around recycling, and we know that across the UK, the top four of the top 5 councils for recycling are led by Liberal Democrats. So we have got quite a good record on recycling and reusing. In terms of a circular economy, I don't think that that any of the policies outside the Green parties are there yet, to be quite honest with you. But I think we need to focus very much on this idea of not offshoring our problems, of promoting our own environmentally friendly food and meat production here, rather than allowing it to be undercut by foreign competition that's produced to lower standards. And I think we perhaps need to be focusing more on the well-being of people in the economy than on just purely GDP growth indicators. It's something that's been floated in our party, and it's not a formal policy yet, but it's something that I would be quite supportive of. But I think the most important thing we need to do at this election is look at the Conservatives' record on things like recycling and on things like obsolescence and on sewage, and saying to ourselves, are we sending the right message at this election, which is that the government haven't done well enough, and choosing an MP that can fight our corner on those issues.
Thank you, Helen. Ben?
No, great question. I mean, you know, obviously we need to be encouraging recycling, but there's much more to it than that for a circular economy. It also means encouraging goods to be produced here in the UK, which can be maintained and can be repaired. And it also means using less, and most importantly of all for me, it means buying, making and selling locally. It means buying, making and selling local goods. It means supporting local businesses. I'm not going to embarrass them and name them today, but in Oswestry alone and the rest of our market towns, we all know the fantastic businesses which make local products, and those are the kind of ones that we need to support. So yes, we need recycling, but this is only a very small part of the circular economy. We need local policies on this, but we also need national ones, and that's the key here. Because for as much as we can recycle, recycling isn't going to get to net zero. We also need to reduce, and we also need to reuse, of course, and that's the key here.
Thank you, Ben. Neil?
Thank you very much, Alison, and a really important question. It is about recycling, it is about reducing our plastic waste, it is about having more sustainable business models so that we're creating produce locally and we're keeping it locally and investing in the local economy. And Helen says this Conservative government hasn't done anything on this issue. Well, we introduced the single-use plastic bags initiative, where we're reducing the use of those. There's been a 95% reduction in the use of single-use plastic bags. We've introduced the plastic packaging tax, which is going to come in place from April 2022, and we're working with other countries, OECDs, to reduce what we're sending out in terms of plastic beads, etc. So those are realistic, obtainable steps that have been delivered by this government. So it's clearly not the case, as Helen has sought to put out, that we are not doing anything. Of course there's more to be done, and it's a continuum that we're working on, but it's those initial steps by reducing the amount of plastic we have on our produce, reducing the use of single-use straws, etc., recycling more, and in fact, I'm going to agree with Duncan here. We should be doing more to minimise our household waste, and we should be doing more to recycle. So certainly, if I was elected on the 16th, I would be wanting to work with our colleagues in the Green Party to deliver something like along those lines, because I think it's a really important thing to be doing as we all take responsibility for the green agenda.
Thank you, Neil. Please forgive me, Alison, if you're in the room, you make yourself known. I've spotted on Twitter that you're going to be here tonight. No. So this question is from someone in the room. This next question is from Sarah Gibson. And Sarah asks on the question of nature and biodiversity. It's quite a long one, so bear with us. This month's swifts, house martins and greenfinches have been added to the red list of Britain's endangered species, a list that now includes 70 species. The red listing is given to species where a significant decline has been recorded continuously for 25 years. So it's obvious that government policies, and crucially the way those policies have been implemented, have been failing for a long time. Radical action is needed to reverse the losses and restore natural habitats. What would the candidates do to address the catastrophic problems facing biodiversity in the UK? And can I invite you, Ben, to take that first?
Absolutely, I thought it might be my turn. Right, Sarah, I think there's three elements to this. It's local, it's national, and it's also global. And above all, it means people having a say, because in communities like ours in North Shropshire, we have it sets us apart from the rest of the country. We've got wonderful green spaces, and the best way to protect them is to have local people having a local say over new developments and planning. But you know, we also need to, I think, look towards Welsh governments and what they've done there in terms of protecting their green spaces, in terms of building new forests, building new trees. And what I really want to get across here is the local element as well, because there's action that we can all take. I'm not going to spell out tonight, but we've all seen them online about what we can do to encourage hedgehogs locally in urban market towns like ours. And the last point that I really want to make here is that this is also a global issue. And you guys will probably be aware that this year the UK stood back from its commitment to spend 0.7% of international aid on international development. And what that has meant is that we've, as a country, had to cut, well, not we, Neil's government have cut funding for wildlife projects around the world. Because, we obviously have enormous problems here at the UK, but there's obviously enormous problems around the world in terms of poaching and similar. So look, there's three elements to this: local, national and global. And that's what I think that we should do on each of them.
Thank you, Ben. Duncan?
Yeah, another great question, and I've seen in my lifetime the depletion of species as birds that I used to think were common and would never disappear have just evaporated there. And it's really quite stark and quite worrying how things have changed. We need legislation. There is legislation. There's the private members' bill called the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, and that would put a statutory foundation footing for recognising that we are faced not just with a climate emergency because of carbon dioxide, but with a biodiversity emergency because we are having such catastrophic loss of our species. And even if you don't care about species or nature, when that is lost, a lot of the materials, potential medicines, a lot of science is lost with them as well every time we lose a species. So it's absolutely fundamental to our well-being, let alone the ecosystems that we depend upon, that we do cherish those. And there's a number of things we can do. Land use, farming is obviously a huge issue. Okay, I wasn't in favour of Brexit, but we have now got Brexit, so there's no excuses now. The government can now come forward with a scheme that does properly protect our countryside and enrich its biodiversity, rather than the continuation of practices which are denuding our soils. Some places they're talking about only having 8 or 10 harvests left in some of the soils, but actually replenishes them and actually introduces practices, permacultural practices, other practices where we can see an increase. And we know that where that has been done, and there's quite a lot of case studies now, that has very dramatically turned things around. So nature's wonderful. Nature can revive if we have the right policies. But then on the local level as well, I think there's desperation. People really want to get involved in this. We saw in Oswestry, Incredible Edibles did quite well, but there's very little interest. But we need the councils and we need other people to come round and give us the support so that we actually take steps in that direction. Enzyme phosphates is another one, scattered around still far too liberally, I feel, and has a fairly dramatic impact on our native flora as well.
Thank you,
so there's a number of things to do. The bill is the most important one.
Thank you, Duncan. Neil, please.
Thank you very much. Very good question. And of course, we've all got to take our responsibility for us. There are 3 candidates on this stage, of which I'm one, from a party who has been in government over the last 25 years.
The next 25 years.
You'll have your chance, and so we all have to take responsibility. The Liberal Democrats were in coalition. We've had a Labour government for 13 years of that, 25. So, and we've had a Conservative government since 2010. So we all need to take responsibility. But that's why I'm backing what the government has done in recent years. We've had the landmark environment bill. That is ensuring that we've got legally binding targets on air quality. We've got environmental biodiversity projects, and we are launching our 25-year environment plan that involves protecting our local waterways and 500,000 hectares of wildlife. It involves protecting 30% of UK's peatlands by 2030, and of course, on top of that, we've got the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, which is going to be involving, amongst other projects, rolling out, tripling the amount of trees planted in this Parliament. So those are pragmatic, practical steps that are being taken. Of course there's more to be done. I want to be working with our farmers who are already doing a fantastic job with biodiversity and protecting our environment. But we all need to redouble our effort. I'm not going to sit here and say we've got it perfectly right. We clearly haven't. But neither has any of the other governments that have come before us. We need to work on it. It's such a vitally important issue, and we need to redouble our efforts on it.
Thank you, Neil. Helen.
Thank you. I think the Conservatives' record is that they were going to plant 30,000 acres of trees a year, and last year they managed 2,200. So a lot of those promises have been broken because they're just empty. The Liberal Democrats support the climate emergency and ecological bill that's been tabled by Caroline Lucas and co-sponsored by some of our MPs, because it's important to recognise that there needs to be legally binding targets for biodiversity and for the climate crisis, and we're entirely in support of that measure. But we need to remember that 70% of British countryside is covered by farmland, so we can't tackle the biodiversity problem without working alongside farmers. And we are also broadly supportive of the idea of the environmental land management system, which brings in the concept of public money for public goods. So that's essentially using government money to encourage farmers to set aside land to support natural habitats such as peatland, wetland and forestry. The problem we have with that is that that's not being phased in until 2028, and our farmers are losing their incomes. They lost their first 10% at the beginning of this month. And if our family farmers go out of business before we get to the point where the new scheme is put into place, we don't have anyone to work with to protect the countryside and to improve those natural habitats that promote biodiversity. So it's absolutely critical that we support our farmers in the intervening period until we've got a properly thought out scheme of public money for public goods to restore those natural environments, because as I say, 70% of the UK is covered in farmland, and we can't improve biodiversity without working with those farmers to lead the way.
Thank you, Helen. So we come now to our final question of the evening, and this comes in from Joe Peakman, who I think is joining us on the live stream. So thank you for your question, Joe. He would like to ask the panel, where do you stand on public ownership as part of a potential solution to the climate crisis? Now, I don't know if you candidates have noticed, but you've all had your fair share of first place, second place, third place, fourth place answers. And as this is our ninth question, so I'm going to revert back to alphabetical order, if that's okay. So I'm going to ask you to answer that question, Duncan. Where do you stand on public ownership as part of a potential solution to the climate crisis?
Slightly better than all talking at once, which will be very dreadful. I think we are in an emergency, and in an emergency you're led by the evidence. So I think we need to cast aside previous dogmas about whether we thought the private sector was better or the public sector better, and look around the world and see what the living world works. And if it works to bring things into the public sector and to use the powers and levers and force of the state to do it, If it works to allow private business to run it and then get on with it, do that. But of course, for too long, this debate has been overreached by previous debates over whether it's best to have nationalisation, state control. We haven't got time to run through those very academic debates. We just need to look issue by issue, what is the best way of getting there. I've talked about the mass installation of homes. We've tried for 10 years to do that through the private sector and builders. We've failed miserably. Still got homes without loft installation. It's now time to get a more public focus to that. But in reality, it's which private businesses can do and do more effectively in the public state. So it's what works that's important here, not what dogma you subscribe to.
Thank you, Duncan. Helen?
I'm probably broadly in agreement with Duncan here. We don't have an ideological commitment either to private ownership or public ownership. We need to look at what works for each individual challenge that we face. And I think I'll just repeat my previous answer. 70% of the UK is covered in farmland. We need to be working with those family farmers to make sure that they can be in place to support our efforts on the climate crisis and the ecological crisis. and family farmers are going to do that better than big industrial scale farms. So I think we really need to focus on them in order to solve our problems, and in the case of other industries, look at what works to get to the right answer.
Thank you, Helen. Neil?
Thank you. I don't think renationalisation of industries is the way forward. What I think we need to be doing is incentivising everybody, whether they're in the public sector or the private sector, to look at green initiatives. That's why we need to be investing money as government, but also encouraging the private sector to match or beat that investment to deliver for the issues that surround climate change. But of course, we can only do that if we have the infrastructure in this country, and therefore it's crucial that we're investing in greener technologies, research and development, supporting those industries and businesses who are seeking solutions to this, because that's how we're going to deal with this climate emergency. It's not an issue of renationalising and we will have sunlit uplands and we will be able to go out and cast our worries of the climate emergency away. What we need to be doing is working together to tackle what is a vital issue.
Thank you, Neil. Ben? Sorry, Ben.
Not a problem. Thank you, Joe. I'll be blunt. Yeah, there's absolutely a role in our economy for public ownership because, let's be frank, some things are more important than profit. But public ownership also means things like cooperatives. And for those who don't know, cooperatives, this is the idea that local businesses are run by local people, and this local issue really is central to my campaign. It's also about municipal control. I mean, a great example of this is if you have a look at the Welsh Government, where you have Transport for Wales now running the railways, and you've got much better trains, you have Wi-Fi on the trains, you have cleaner trains. And what this means really is that people are more incentivised to use these local services, these public transport greener services, instead of jumping in the car. And that's absolutely what we need. There's also a role for local councils in this, and that's not me saying that local councils should start nationalising, but what it means is that local councils have a part to play here in supporting local economies, local initiatives, supporting local buses, and we've all got a part to play because, as I've said a few times, it's a local issue, it's a national issue, it's a global issue. So yeah, in short, I do support some role of public ownership, in particular cooperatives.
Thank you, Ben. That concludes the formal questions for this evening. We've actually romped along, and I'd like to thank all the candidates for respecting the clock so well. We've actually romped along really well this evening. But I would like to invite the candidates. Now, I think you were given a minute for your summing up. Is that right? So I'm going to allow you two. So if you want to take longer than perhaps you prepared for, then we've certainly got room in the meeting to do that. So to invite you to do your summing up, and again I'm going to go in order of fairness, alphabetical order. So Duncan, if you'd like to make your closing remarks, please.
This is unexpected, but I think we've gone through quite a wide range of issues. I think that some of the other panellists have been kind enough to recognise this. The Green Party has policies on all these issues and has had policies on all these issues for 10 or 15 years. We may not have been in government, but we've now found a government is talking about the things that we were talking about 10 years ago and were derided at the time and told we were just foolish people who didn't know what we were talking about. So we do feel that now is the time to recognise that. If you want a party that's actually going to tackle these issues, there is a real huge risk of greenwash. You will get that. We'll get lots of people saying, oh, we do that, we do that, we do that, and they might mean it, but they don't actually do it because it's not their top priority. That's what they say to you, it's a priority, but then all these other priorities, and somehow it never quite gets to the top. But the Green Party is the genuine party that cares for the environment, always has, but it also cares about equality and making a fairer world for all. Because there isn't much point saving the world if we're just going to save it for the welfare of the rich. But you need a world that's safe for everyone. So we haven't talked about it so much tonight, but the Green Party has those twin pillars. One, about a sustainable world, but also a world for all, where all can contribute and you're not condemned by the resources your parents had as to whether you can get a house or not, or where you were born, or even whether you're particularly academically inclined or not. Everybody can contribute and have equality in our society. So I think that's enough for me.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Helen.
Thank you. I think it's important to remember that this is a by-election and we are talking about one MP. So I could run through Lib Dem policies on the environment, of which I'm very proud, but I can't promise you to implement them as a result of this election if I'm elected on December the 16th. This election is about sending a message to the government that we think that their promises are empty and that they have taken us for granted for too long. And it's an opportunity to elect somebody who's going to listen to the people locally and fight the issues that matter locally for North Shropshire. So what I'm proposing to do is say, let's look at the issues that face North Shropshire at the moment. In terms of climate emergency, they're around public transport, they're around supporting our farming industry so that it can move to lead the world in the climate emergency and in environmental standards. And it's about encouraging greener practices across the county, so using our land more wisely in terms of microgeneration. So this is our real opportunity to say to the government, enough is enough, you've taken us for granted, let's choose an MP who's going to listen to local people and fight their corner.
Thank you, Helen. Liam.
Thank you very much. Well, of course, and I think there's one consensus that we've had on this panel this evening, that we all recognise that this is a vitally important issue, and it's something that we all have to take ownership for. It is the Conservative government that has really pushed forward the green agenda, and I pay tribute to Duncan and the Green Party, who have been banging the drum for it for a number of years, but it has now become a mainstream issue in politics. Sure, Duncan would say we could go further, but we have taken significant strides forward. What I would say, and with the greatest respect to Helen, she set out that a vote for a party other than the Conservative Party would be a protest vote and would send a bloody nose to Westminster and to the Prime Minister. But of course, that doesn't achieve anything. She said she has no control as a single MP to influence anything. That's different if you vote for a Conservative Member of Parliament working with a Conservative government. And I'm not going to profess that I am the world expert on climate change, but what I am is I'm listening. What I want to do is listen to everybody in North Shropshire and be a strong voice and advocate on their behalf. That's the role of a Member of Parliament, that's the role of a hard-working constituency Member of Parliament, and that's what I'm seeking to do. And it will be working alongside the government in a pragmatic and cooperative way that we will be able to deliver on these promises. And yes, I want to see them go further. Of course I do. But we need to take small steps to begin with in order to make that journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Ben.
Thank you. I mean, if there's one word I want to get across tonight, it's optimism. It's optimism for the future. And it's because I really strongly believe that our path to net zero is not through sacrifice, it's through opportunity. And I'm going to be completely bluntly honest, one day I honestly do believe that we are going to meet net zero. We might not be on track at the moment, we might not be on track for as long as Neil's government are in, we might not be on track for as long as Helen's party supports Neil's government, as they did previously, but we are going to meet net zero. And there's two reasons for this. Firstly, young people. Speak to young people today, hear how passionate they are about reaching net zero, avoiding the climate crisis, and the opportunities that we're going to get along the way. But also the fact that we have 4 candidates here from, let's be honest, the 4 main parties in the UK who are agreed that we do need to get to net zero. Look, I truly believe that in 34 years the wheelchair is going to be a lot brighter place than it is at the moment. And it's not just because we're going to avoid the climate crisis, it's because we're going to have those new opportunities along the way. And that has to start at the local level. It means investing in public transport, bringing the railway back to Oswestry. It means a new energy mix, which means investing in technology and bringing jobs to Oswestry, but also market rate when, Whitchurch, elsewhere. It means investing in greener homes. It means giving people more say over their local natural environment. And that absolutely has to start locally. And I'm a local candidate in this campaign, and that's the plan that's brought forward. Thank you.
So that concludes this evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Zero Hour Shropshire, I would like to thank all of you candidates for coming along to Oswestry on this chilly Monday. Helen, Ben, Duncan and Neil, thank you so much. Thank you to our questioners for your very thought-provoking questions, and I'm sure that you'll have agreed that there were some very thought-provoking answers too. So thank you for coming, and thank you to our audience on live stream for viewing. We wish you all a safe journey home, and the last thing that I would say to you is don't forget to vote on the 16th of December. Thank you.
Thank you, Jules, for chairing it so well. It's not easy with four politicians to keep order, and Jules does a great job. But Jason there, who's twiddled buttons that's made things happen, and I think Chris at the back, who's twiddled cameras that have made things happen as well. So everybody's devoted their time for free. Nobody's got paid for this. I don't even know who's paid for the hall, to be perfectly honest. They might want some money, I don't know. But just recognise that this event only happens because a number of people are prepared to do the hard work and put themselves forward, frankly no reward. So thanks to them.